I really like dinosaurs. T-Rex, Stegosaurus, Triceratops. You know that feeling when you walk into a museum being in the same room as a dinosaur? It's just special. The actual bones of something that was alive roaming the earth millions of years ago. So you can imagine how shocked I was when I found out that some of those bones on display in museums weren't real.
What do you mean not real?
I mean, not real. Some of the bones on display are replicas.
What, like even at like the Smithsonian?
Yeah, even at the Smithsonian. Now, I'm not saying that all bones are actually replicas, the ones on display at museums, just some of them. But like you, I was confused, needed to find out a little more, so did a little journey, found out why they use replicas, I found out who makes these replicas, and you know, I really found out that it wasn't as bad as I thought.
I feel like I was lied to like my whole childhood.
Same. Totally the same. But you know what? We'll get through this together.
Okay.
This is Tag Team.
Fossils are really the best evidence of evolutionary change. I mean, we see in our everyday life small evolutionary changes. For instance, you see in a city, for instance, one kind of squirrel being replaced by another, or bacteria developing resistance to certain antibiotics that we take all too often. That's sort of microevolutionary events, or on really small scale. But like the really big scale of life is in fossils. Hi, I'm Hans Süß. I'm the chairman of the Department of Paleobiology here at the National Museum of Natural History. To give you a perspective, what is alive today, the millions of species that we have, are perhaps 1% at the most of everything that ever lived.
Bones are critical to the work paleontologists do. It's our main piece of evidence for past life. Hello, I'm Dr. Alton Dooley. I'm a paleontologist and the executive director of the Western Science Center. Working on fossil bones can be a real challenge. First, you have to find them, and they're not exactly common, and they tend to be really fragile. So, imagine what your bones are going to look like after they've been buried in the ground for 80 million years. Since we don't have a lot of them, and they're very fragile, they're really precious items to us.
Dr. Dooley and his team at the Western Science Center have done a bunch of research on mastodons that were found in the area. Their biggest find, Max, is one of the biggest mastodons ever found in the Western United States.
When you see the Max display, you see a big, grand layout of a skeleton with bones mounted on that. Those are replicas of the original bones.
It's important to note, all the museums we spoke to say they let the visitors know which bones are real and which are replica. And some of the bones are indeed real. Sue, the amazing T-Rex at the Field Museum in Chicago, the bones on display are real except for the head. Museums are keeping it real with us.
Okay, but then why do they even bother with the replicas? Why don't they just hang the real thing?
Most dinosaurs that we know, for instance, and most big mammals are only known in some cases from a single specimen. But everyone is interested in. Obviously, the institution or the scientists who collect it have the specimen and put it in a public repository. But then other museums would like to have one too.
We use replicas for a couple of different reasons in exhibits, and the biggest reason is that the fossils are irreplaceable and they're fragile. To mount a fossil skeleton either requires an extremely expensive and complex armature, or it requires drilling holes into these irreplaceable bones. We really don't like to do that if we can avoid it.
Okay, so it's kind of like when I collected baseball cards. I'd leave some cards outside of the plastic protectors, the players whose cards probably weren't worth so much. But the really hard to find, expensive ones, they would go inside of a glass or plastic protector, right?
Exactly, but imagine your unprotected baseball card looked exactly the same as the one in the glass. Same picture, same design, same condition. If you had a tiny bend in the corner of your protected card, the unprotected would as well. But using a replica gives museums even more flexibility in how they display the bones to give people visiting a better experience.
The actual fossils are petrified, so they weigh like unbelievable amounts of pounds. In casts, you can make basically a shell. They don't even have to be filled in, or you can fill them in with another very light material. And then you have the same skeleton, for instance, at the American Museum of Natural History. In the entrance Roosevelt Hall, there's this huge Barosaurus rising up on its hind legs. That skeleton weighs 800 pounds. If you had the actual fossil, you would be looking at something 5-10 tons and on this little spot, way beyond any conceivable floor loading. There's a preference now for casts because you can do really lively things. You can have a T-Rex standing on one leg and using the other leg to stomp on a Triceratops and so, which you could have never done with the actual fossil bones.
I think that many people, when they come to a museum, don't necessarily realize what things they're looking at are original specimens and which ones are replicas of those specimens. And they're often mixed together within museum exhibits. I personally don't think that's actually a big deal. These replicas are so incredibly good that at a glance, even an expert can be confused as to whether they're looking at the original or not. The replicas are accurate down to sub-millimeter scales, so you really are hard-pressed to tell the difference.
Okay, I can't tell the difference, right? But when I first heard about all this, I had a lot of questions for Jacques. Specifically, where do they even make these replica bones? Turns out there's a few companies around the world that actually specialize in these types of bones, and one of them is in Chatsworth, California. It's called Bone Clones.
I dig it. Get it? Because they're bones.
Yeah,
I dig it.
I got it. Yeah.
My name is Michelle Tabensky. I am the research anthropologist for Bone Clones. Bone Clones is a company that manufactures and distributes skeletal replicas. Now, a skeletal replica is a cast that's created out of a real bone. So the people that use our services are going to be anybody who teaches skeletal anatomy. So that will be medical professionals, that'll be anthropologists, paleontologists, zoologists, anyone who's teaching skeletal anatomy. And as you can see, we have obviously a lot of different humans here, and we also have a whole zoological line.
For a company that seems so rooted in science, Bone Clones actually has a fascinating origin story.
My name is Dave Cronin. I'm CEO of Bone Clones.
Dave had a pet monitor lizard that was 7 feet long.
Just for the audience, what's a monitor lizard?
This.
Whoa, that's a serious lizard.
Yeah, no doubt, right? But unfortunately, Dave's lizard passed away, and he wanted to know why.
I took him to the vet, and I said, can you tell me why he died? Any idea? Because I don't want that to happen to the other ones. And he said, well, I can't tell. I don't have an x-ray machine. Why don't you prepare the part of the skeleton, prepare the neck vertebrae? And I said, what do you mean? He said, get the skin off of it, the meat off it, just bring me the vertebrae. I can tell if it's cracked, if the cartilage is damaged, and some reason why that might happen. So I said, I don't know how to do it. How do I do it? Go to the museum and ask them. So I went to LA County Museum, said, how do you prepare a skeleton? They gave me some rough idea how to do it. I went home, prepared the neck vertebrae, and I said, from what I know about osteology, this looks just like a human. I said, I wonder what the rest of it looks like. By the way, there's nothing wrong with the neck. No one had any idea how he died.
I'm gonna be honest, Jonathan. It's a little cool, but it's really strange. Don't worry, cowboy, I'm not gonna do that to you.
So Dave was so fascinated by the skeleton of his lizard that he was interested in seeing what other animals look like. Can you even imagine how he went about doing that?
No idea. Books.
Nope.
Animal Planet?
Mm-mm.
Oh, the internet.
Wasn't a thing?
Did he work at a zoo?
Close. But before you hear the answer, remember this is the early 90s, so things were a little different back then.
I went to the zoo. I said, what do you do with your dead animals? They said, we incinerate them. I said, oh. Well, would you give them to me? Because I want to prepare them, I want to study them. They said, sure. So for years, I'd go to the LA Zoo and get dead animals, no matter what it was. And I'd prepare it. And then I would study it and keep it for about 3 months, or maybe a year even. And then I would sell it. That started really a little tiny business selling these skeletons.
Now, his work was really well received, so well in fact that he couldn't keep up with the demand.
Are you saying he was running out of animals?
Exactly, but it's a good thing that the zoo only had so many dead animals.
I have one of a kind. Other people will want it. Now I have to wait till another one dies 3 or 4 years. How about if I find a way of reproducing the one I have?
Dave went to Hollywood and worked with renowned special effects artist Gino Acevedo. Gino worked on some huge Hollywood films like Alien 3, Death Becomes Her, and went on to do the special effects for the Lord of the Rings movies.
And he said, why don't you come to the shop, our shop, where we do these sort of things. We prepare molds all the time. Come at 2 o'clock in the morning when there's no one there, and I'll show you how to do it. And he showed me some rough ideas how to do it. I went home and I started to do it. I actually made a little spinner, and then I thought, now I can put anything on there and create a mold and produce many of them.
How did the museums get involved?
Well, the first museum to use bone clones was the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, and from there, it kind of just blew up. The Smithsonian started using them, the Field Museum, American Museum of Natural History, museums all over the world.
You know, it's amazing how real they look.
Right? They really do. Bone Clones goes over all sorts of details to make sure they're as precise as possible. Here's how it happens.
The way that the process works is we first contact an institution, either a museum, a university that has a specimen that we are interested in. Once we create an agreement with them, we will have the specimen shipped over to our facility, where we will prep it with different kinds of waxes and clays and whatnot to secure delicate structures. And then after that, we create a mold. And the mold usually involves some form of silicone, a little bit of fiberglass to create a nice hard shell mold. Once we have the mold, we take the original specimen out, and then from that mold, we can make as many copies as we'd like.
We have something that we call a tool to reel. And a tool to reel, when we get a new skull in, we reproduce it, we take the reproduction, we look at the original, and we match every detail in it. I'm talking about it could take 8 or 10 hours to do that, in pouring and in tooling, painting, everything. We want it to be an exact duplicate of the real one.
It's important to remember how rare some of these fossils really are. Lucy is the name given to a skeleton of a 3.2 million year old Australopithecus. It's one of the greatest finds of all time, and obviously, there's only one. Side note, she was found in 1974, and she got her name from the Beatles' song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. The real Lucy can be found at the National Museum of Ethiopia, and only at the National Museum of Ethiopia. That means nobody would be able to see Lucy in person unless they go to Ethiopia. However, creating a replica really allows people all over the world to be able to see and learn about this pretty extraordinary archaeological find. Okay, Jacques, there's no way that this was the only way that museums got things done, because bone clones wasn't even around until what, the 90s?
True, and museum bones on display were real for a long time, until there was this really exciting discovery in New Jersey. Have you ever heard of a hadrosaur?
No.
Dude, you have got to brush up on your dinos.
I know.
And actually, the first one here was actually assembled in the United States. There was a British sculptor named Waterhouse Hawkins, and in New Jersey in the 1840s, they found the first American dinosaur, the famous Hadrosaurus, in a marl pit, and they had quite a few bones of it. So the first people who researched it at the Academy of Natural Sciences, which still exists in Philadelphia, they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we sort of made a model of this? So they got the sculptor to work with lizard skeletons to build basically an oversized lizard standing on its hind legs, because they had enough bones to see that the hind legs were a lot longer than the forelegs. What happened when the better skeletons were found, the first person who did skeletal mounts was Professor O.C. Marsh at Yale University, and he used paper mache because they didn't know how they could sort of make large structures like that. They tried first plaster, but that wasn't very satisfactory, and paper mache was lightweight enough that you could sort of assemble it easily, and you could also move it around if you wanted. If some other museum wanted to do a temporary exposition, they could actually ship the material there, reassemble it, and you had a nice little display. The new approach were, if you use real specimens, you mount each bone basically individually, and you use lightweight materials to replace the missing parts. That really works well, and I think that's going to be the standard for a long time to come.
Okay, so that's everything they're going to let me tell you about dinosaurs. I have a whole lot more. But there's a lot more to replicas.
Yeah, well, Bone Clones really specializes in human bones.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lacey. I'm a professor of biological anthropology at California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Professor Lacey uses bone clones for her anthropology classes.
I'd imagine it's not easy or cheap to find a full skeleton of human bones.
Yeah, well, definitely not as easy as it once was, that's for sure.
So if we go back into the 1800s, the ways that teaching facilities, medical schools got a hold of bodies was they just took any body that was unclaimed. And so that would typically be lower socioeconomic people, and it often was people from prisons, mental institutions, hospitals. And so these bodies were then taken, given to medical students to learn from, and then often skeletonized, and the skeletons kept at a number of different collections. Things changed after World War II, and now it became mandatory to either cremate or inter those individuals, not let medical schools scoop them up.
So if a school wants to study real human bones, they have to get them from somebody who really donated them to science. The problem is, most people who donate their bones are adult white males, which makes studying different types of bones difficult and expensive.
The few that are available for medical study become pretty expensive to be able to get a hold of, and that's partially why we end up purchasing plastic replica skulls, because they're just easier to get a hold of, they hold up better, because real human skulls are quite fragile, and we have students who every semester coming through and handling these things. I would like them to, of course, be respected, but also to survive.
A real articulated human skeleton costs about $5,000. A good articulated replica is about half the price, which is why it's probably a better choice for schools on a budget.
So I checked out some replica dinosaur bones, and they looked identical to the real thing. Can you tell the difference with the human bone?
Yeah, I couldn't tell the difference, but I did ask Professor Lacey how she can even tell the difference.
So we have two femurs here. One of them is a plastic replica and one of them is real. One of the ways that we can tell them apart is that if we look here on the real one, we're going to see little holes that represent porosity, part of the growth of the femur. We're going to see kind of differences here in muscle attachment. It's going to be rough. All these things that would indicate that this belonged to a specific individual who had large muscles, for instance, in this case. On this side, right, we have a plastic one, and we do see some of this roughening on here, but we can touch it and feel that it's rounded. The holes don't actually go all the way through. And also this is plastic. I tap it and it's solid, whereas this one, you can hear that it's hollow.
Okay, when you first told me that many of these bones in these museums weren't real, I didn't really believe you. I'm still a little shell-shocked by that, but I guess as I kind of think about it more, it makes sense.
Yeah, you can tell from all the scientists that we talk to that these replicas are really important to their field of study, and also really to future generations that are interested in the science.
From my perspective, what I'm interested in for you to see is the shape, the patterns amongst them, because how often do you even get to see these? They're still in person, right? In any sort of capacity, but I could understand how people might feel a little bit betrayed to think that they've seen, a real Neanderthal in the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, when unfortunately they have not.
I think fossil organisms have kind of a special place or hold special meaning for a lot of people. Part of it is this idea of deep time, that the past is so alien to us, and that there are these amazing things going on that aren't here anymore, and this is our only window into what was going on. There's something really majestic in that, I believe.
Because it's presented in such a wonderful way that it shows the animals as if they're alive, as opposed to being just static. I think people really get a sense of the animal's life.
The thing about museums is that there should always be about real things. So it doesn't have to be a real complete skeleton, but it should have real elements in it. And that's something that's unique about museums. When you look at all these things, these are things that are beyond the reach of most people, and so you can see them here.
The Tyrannosaurus and the Triceratops, those were two of my favorite dinosaurs as a kid growing up. I've seen that display at Los Angeles County Museum, and it strikes me every time I go there. And I honestly have no idea if they are the original fossils or if they're replicas, and I don't care. It's still amazing, because even if they're replicas, the replicas based on reality. Those replicas are based on something that really did come out of the ground and is sitting in a museum somewhere. So I don't care if the thing is real, but seeing that replica, I know that it's there, I know that it is real. And that's all I need.
Okay, so yeah, our minds are blown, right?
Yes.
Safe to say, but it does make sense. But I guess the question is, does it even matter at this point? If you go to a museum, you know the replicas.
Well, for me, I guess it matters and it doesn't. I'm a sci-fi guy, so I believe in aliens and I believe they're going to visit us one day. And if I don't get to meet it while it's alive, I would like to see the actual bones as opposed to replica bones. But at the same time, my sci-fi fantasy aside, I understand the relevance and why, because it's important that other people get to see the bones, like the Ethiopia with Lucy. Like, that's important that the rest of the world gets to see something like that.
When we see the alien, right? At least if we can't see the real thing, we know there are people now who will make replica aliens for us, and they will look just like the real thing, just like they do with the human bones and these animal bones and dinosaur bones. I just can't believe there are people making a buck off this, there are people receiving a paycheck for this. It's a pretty cool job.
Yeah, it's a cool job, and the origin story is fascinating.
Pet monitor lizard.
Pet monitor lizard. It's like, let's say it's the shack of lizards. Is that good?
Yeah, 7 feet, so.
Yeah, that works.
That's creepy. Yeah.
All right, this is Tag Team. I'm Jacques Slade.
I'm Jonathan Gonzalez. We will see you next time.